Aquarius. There are moments in life when nothing seems to visibly change, and yet something inside you is no longer the same. You're still there, the same people, the same familiar stories around you, but the feeling, it's shifted. Just a little. Lighter. Slower. And somehow, deeper. It's not the kind of change you can explain right away. It's more like something quietly unfolding within you, even before it finds its way into words. And what's interesting is, you begin to feel it more clearly, even without having any concrete answers. Almost like a part of you already knows that something is drawing closer in its own very personal way. And if you pay close enough attention, this moment might be where everything starts to gently turn. So subtle, yet just enough for you to notice. You may have experienced a moment like this. Everything around you still looks the same streets, the same conversations, the same rhythms of life. Nothing too different. And yet, something inside you has quietly shifted. Not clear enough to name, not big enough to make you stop and say, this is a turning point. Just a slightly lighter feeling when you breathe in, a space in your mind, no longer crowded with as many questions as before. You're still you, but not exactly the same as yesterday. And maybe the most noticeable part is that you're no longer trying to understand everything right away. There was a time when you were used to searching for answers, wondering why things unfolded the way they did, wondering what others were thinking, wondering if you were on the right path. But right now, a part of you is beginning to slow down, not because you've given up on understanding, but because you no longer need to know everything, just to feel okay. And in that slowing down, a different kind of peace begins to appear. It's not loud, it's not dazzling, it doesn't rush in with excitement, but it's there, quiet, steady, and real. Like walking into a familiar room, but noticing the light feels softer today. And somehow, you realize you don't need to change the room. You just needed to feel it differently. You may not fully understand what's happening, and maybe you don't have to. Because some shifts don't begin with action. They begin with feeling. A very subtle feeling that something within you is gently rearranging itself. Not to become someone else, but to return closer to who you've always been. And if you stay with it long enough, you might begin to notice. What's changing isn't the world around you. It's the way you stand within it. A new perspective, a different breath, a softer way of being. You don't have to rush to grasp it. You don't have to turn it into something clear. Just be there and allow yourself to feel. Because sometimes the most important beginnings don't arrive with a loud sound. They come as a quiet shift, one that only you can truly recognize. You know, not everything important in this life arrives in the form of words. Some things choose to stay in the quiet, not because they're small, not because they're not real, but because some feelings need time to grow before they can be named. There are things that, if spoken too soon, might become fragile or even lose the very meaning they once held. So they remain, quietly, not to be hidden, but to be understood at the right time. And maybe, somewhere in your life right now, there's a silence just like that. Something not yet spoken, not confirmed, not defined. And yet, you can feel it. Not through logic, but through a kind of sensitivity that's deeply your own. Something you can't always explain. Maybe it's the way someone looks at you, just a little longer than before, or the way they choose to stay, even without saying much. Maybe it's a connection that isn't fully clear, but also not unclear, and you begin to realize not every silence is empty. Some silences carry more than words ever could. But what's interesting is, this doesn't only come from others. Sometimes you're the one holding something inside, a feeling without a name, a thought not yet ready to be admitted. A truth you've only just begun to touch, not because you're afraid to face it, but because you're learning to feel it in the most honest way, without rushing, without forcing, without needing to turn it into an answer right away. And maybe this is what's changing in you. You no longer need everything to be clear from the beginning. You no longer need to be sure before allowing yourself to feel. You start to trust what doesn't need words, those subtle signals, carrying a depth that's hard to describe, like standing in front of a view and not needing anyone to explain why it's beautiful. You just know, you feel it. And sometimes, that's enough. There may come a time when these unspoken things find their way to be expressed, through words, through actions, or simply through a presence that feels more open than before. But right now, maybe what matters isn't waiting for it to be said. It's realizing you've already started to feel it. And in a world that's always rushing to define everything, the fact that you can allow a feeling to exist without naming it right away, that's a very quiet kind of growth. A kind of growth that doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. You just know. Something is there, very real, very close, and slowly, becoming clearer in its own way. And then, after all those unnamed silences, something very different begins to take shape, not from explanations, not from someone telling you everything is okay, but from within you, in a way that's so subtle, yet deep enough for you to notice. Clarity sometimes isn't about understanding everything. It's about reaching a point where you no longer feel the need to. You may still not know where this story is going. You may not know what this feeling will lead to. But something has changed. You're no longer caught in the same loops of thought. The questions that used to linger somehow begin to fall away. Not because you found the answers, but because you no longer need to hold on to them. There's a kind of lightness, a strange one, not loud, not dramatic, like setting down a bag you didn't even realize you'd been carrying for so long. And when your hands are finally empty, you notice how tired you actually were. This clarity doesn't make you more certain about the future, but it grounds you in the present. You no longer need to guess what others are thinking. You no longer need to analyze every detail to find meaning. You just begin to trust how you feel, trust your own rhythm. Trust that quiet sense of enough when something brings you peace. And this is not passivity. It's a deeper kind of awareness when you understand that not every answer needs to come from outside. Some answers only appear when you're quiet enough to listen to yourself. You may start to notice the things that once held you back no longer do. The connections that once felt uncertain now feel clear in a way that doesn't need explaining. Not because they've changed, but because the way you see them has. Like when the light shifts in the same room, everything is still there, but you see it more clearly. And maybe this is what's happening to you right now. Not a big awakening, not a dramatic breakthrough, but a very subtle rearrangement in the way you experience the world. You're no longer searching for absolute certainty. You no longer need everything to be confirmed right away. You just need a feeling that you're not moving against yourself, a sense of calm, steady enough to keep going. And sometimes, that alone is a very deep kind of clarity. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be proven. You just know, in your own way, that you're getting closer to where you truly belong. And from that gentle sense of clarity, something else begins to unfold. Not a big shift that others can easily see, but a subtle movement in the way you show up. You're still there, but your energy has changed. And you might notice it in the most ordinary moments. The way you look at someone, no longer filled with so many expectations. The way you listen, no longer rushing to respond. The way you stay in a situation, not because you have to, but because you genuinely want to. And there are also moments when you choose to let go. Not because you don't care, but because you understand. Not everything needs to be held onto just to prove its meaning. This is a deeper kind of shift. When you stop trying to control the flow of everything, you begin to trust the rhythm of life, not in a passive way, but in a conscious kind of trust, that things are unfolding in their own way, for their own reasons. You no longer feel the need to know what's coming next. You're not unsettled when things aren't clear yet, because within you, there's now something steady, a grounding that doesn't come from others, not from circumstances, but from the way you hold yourself inside. And when that happens, the way you respond to the world begins to shift too. You're no longer pulled by every small thing. You don't let passing emotions decide your actions anymore. You slow down, not to miss out, but to choose what truly fits you. It's like standing by a river. Before, you might have wanted to swim across as fast as possible, but now you pause and watch the current, and you begin to realize you don't always have to rush to get to the other side. Sometimes understanding the direction of the water is already a kind of guidance, and in that slowing down, you start to feel more. You begin to recognize what truly brings you peace, what makes you feel like you're in the right place, and what simply no longer aligns. No need to explain it, no need to justify it. It's just a knowing, very quiet, but very steady. And maybe this is the moment when you stop trying to force things to happen your way. Instead, you allow things to unfold as they are, not because you've given up, but because you understand. Some things only arrive at the right time when you stop trying to pull them toward you. A very gentle acceptance, yet filled with strength. And from here, everything begins to move again, in a rhythm that's slower, deeper, and closer to who you truly are. And as you begin to settle into that slower rhythm, something else starts to appear, not as a clear signal, not as a full explanation, but as a very subtle shift, enough for you to feel, yet not strong enough to name right away. You might notice it in the smallest moments. A glance, lingering just a little longer than before, not turning away so quickly. A sentence that sounds ordinary, yet carries a different tone, or simply someone's presence no longer feels as distant as it once did. And what's interesting is, none of it needs to be explained. No one steps in to confirm it. There's no official moment to mark the change. And still, not through logic, but through a very natural feeling, like walking into a space and instantly knowing it feels right. You don't need to analyze the lighting. You don't need to understand the structure. You just feel it. And this time, you don't question your feeling the way you used to. You don't ask yourself, am I imagining this? Am I getting it wrong? Instead, you allow the feeling to exist. No rush to verify it. No need to gather proof. Because some things, when you try to prove them, they lose their shape. But when you simply feel them, they become clearer than ever. What's about to be revealed may not be a specific piece of information, not a sudden truth, but a realization, arriving very gently, yet enough to shift the way you see things. You begin to understand something, without anyone explaining it. You begin to notice a connection you hadn't seen before. You begin to feel sincerity in the smallest details. And sometimes, what makes you pause isn't what's being said, but what becomes clearer within the silence. You don't need a grand confirmation. You don't need a complete answer. Just a moment, when everything inside you suddenly aligns with what's unfolding outside, like two pieces finally finding their place. No loud sound, no display, just a natural sense of fit. And you realize what matters isn't how it shows up, but how you feel it. Not through logic, not through reasoning, but through a quietness that feels undeniably real. And maybe that's when you begin to understand. Not everything needs to be spoken out loud, to become true within you. And then, after everything you've moved through, the quiet spaces, the unspoken things, the subtle shifts within you, maybe what matters most right now isn't understanding everything, not finding the final answer, not putting the whole picture together so it finally makes sense, but simply allowing yourself to feel. That's it. No need to force yourself to figure out what's happening. No need to name every emotion. No need to be certain about anything. You don't have to rush this process. You don't have to arrive anywhere sooner. Just stay with yourself. In a moment, slow enough to hear your own breath more clearly. In a space quiet enough to realize you're not empty inside the way you once thought. If anything, you're becoming fuller, full of presence, full of awareness, full of feelings that don't need to be explained. And that is not weakness. It's a different kind of strength. A strength that doesn't need to show itself on the outside, doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. You just know you're here, and you're listening to yourself. You don't have to understand everything to keep moving forward. You don't have to be certain to begin. Sometimes, simply allowing yourself to feel is already a powerful step, Because when you stop trying to control everything, something very natural happens. Things begin to fall into place, not in the way you expected, not according to a clear plan, but in a rhythm that feels uniquely yours. And then, at some point, without warning, you realize, you understand. Not through words, not through logic, but through a deep, quiet feeling that things have become clearer, in a way only you could ever recognize. And if you're still here, listening, maybe it's not by accident, maybe it's just coincidence, or maybe you've brushed up against something that's already very close to you. And if somewhere along this journey there was a moment that made you pause, just a little longer, then maybe you've already started to feel it. No need to rush, no need to understand it right away. Just hold on to that feeling as something quietly your own. Because sometimes, the lightest things are the ones that stay the longest. And if this story reached you in any way at all, you're welcome to stay a little longer. Because maybe, whatever comes next will continue to unfold in a way that's entirely your own.